Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm Tanujja Dadlani, Research Analyst at ISAS, and I'll be your host for today's episode. We're excited to welcome Dr. Afiya Zia, a researcher, writer, and activist based in Karachi. She's the author of Faith and Feminism in Pakistan, having conducted extensive research on the role of religion in politics and the way it influences women and their voting behaviors. Welcome, Dr. Afiya. Let's begin.
Thank you, Tanujja. Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Afiya, you've previously discussed populism, piety, and post-feminism in Pakistan. You've defined piety as different from religiosity, with piety politics being performative. Could you give a brief description of the role piety specifically plays in the narrative of current politics and the kind of loyalty that piety and populist politicians claim from women voters?
Yeah, great question, and a great start. So it's important to say that the place of Islam in Pakistan's governance, whether it's in all institutions, at all tiers, in all policies, and even at community level power dynamics, has been a contested issue. It's not a settled issue since the country's independence in 1947. The other important point is that the religious right wing in Pakistan has consistently opposed women's equality, whether it's in family laws, political participation, or even in inheritance rights. And the tool that's been used the most has been male clerical interpretations of religion, of Islam, and of course, patriarchal collusion with other state institutional heads, the judiciary, etc. And this is despite the fact that the founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he had a relatively liberal vision for women's citizenship, and a liberal dispensation did take place in Pakistan in the early years. You see, it was conceived as a very modern nation state. A lot of this, Tanuja, has been documented by some historians, Pakistani historians, Aisha Jalal's work, even lawyers like colleague Osama Siddiq in The Alien and Alien Justice. Oxford University professor Faisal Devji has written The Muslim Zion. And from a feminist perspective, Rubina Sehgal's work, The Pakistan Project, these are some important texts that sort of outline this and display this. Okay, so regarding the women's question, yes, the debate over the compatibility of Islamic laws with feminism intensified in the 1980s. And this was because there was a global wave of Islamic revivalism in the late 70s. And you recall there was the Iranian Revolution of 1979, right? So this became a key period when feminists in Muslim majority countries started resisting the gendered and sexual political order that was shaped by religious conservatism. So it was happening globally. In Pakistan, we had General Ziaul Haq's very ascetic, very harsh, brutal military dictatorship between 1977 and 88. And this saw the state imposing Islamic laws, which severely curtailed women's rights. Women became the linchpin of sort of his um, symbolizing what Islamic rule meant. So there was a lot of feminist resistance, a very brave feminist resistance at that time. And the women's movement at the time, made a conscious decision to frame gender equality demands from a secular and universalist perspective rather than within an Islamic ethos. It was a very conscious, debated choice or direction. If you fast forward to the early 2000s, the new millennium, piety movements like the Al Huda network, which was led by Farhat Hashmi in Pakistan, gained a lot of traction. It had an appeal for middle class and even upper middle class urban women, and a lot of traction within and attraction from diaspora communities who were looking for stabilizing their identities, in overseas, particularly women, right? This is about a women's piety movement. And then you had the attacks of 9/11 in 2001. All of this fueled Muslim identity politics globally. So this is the kind of second phase. And it's around this time that Muslim piety became framed or sold or marketed as a non-extremist, but also non-Western, non-liberal alternative for Muslims globally. It challenged the secular human rights and feminist discourses for being racist, for being limited, for being, sort of coming out of a colonial mindset. However, Over the past 2 decades, I've been arguing that this piety politics has not only bolstered and anchored patriarchal conservatism further, it's embedded it further, but it's also permeated popular culture. So you will see in Pakistan, for example, and actually in several Muslim contexts, Muslim majority contexts, we have a lot of game shows and trivia quizzes that are based around religion. You have a lot of consumer products like Islamic banking, halal certified commodities, halal polio vaccines. You have something called hijab shampoos, and really a kind of a merger or what I would call Islamic capitalism. All of this left very little room for secular spaces. And sort of, I've argued that piety became the B team for religiosity, right? So that's the connection. And just a last point with regard to your question is that it's also important to know that religious parties, from the outside, Pakistan's now seen at the tail end like a tailism. It's seen as this religious, full of extremists, etc. But religious parties have historically had very limited electoral success in Pakistan. This is important. And their brief rise of these parties in 2002 was only enabled by another general, General Musharraf, in order to weaken the other democratically elected political parties. But at the end of all of this, currently, the recent wave of piety politics has aligned with the populism of the former sportsman and former cricketer turned politician Imran Khan. And his political identity, because he was a philanderer, sort of a global sex symbol, even, his identity as a redeemed pietist leader now is supported well in the person of his third and current wife, who is fully veiled. Her name is Busha Bibi. Now, this is unusual in Pakistan. We've never had a fully veiled. In fact, the full veil has been something that has eventually petered out, in Pakistan. But there's been a resurfacing of it or reinvention of women's piety politics in Pakistan. And this brand of pious populism I've been arguing like for 10 years has not advanced gender equality. There's absolutely no indicators. In fact, quite the opposite. They have stabilized patriarchal norms in Pakistan. Now, having said this, Khan's populism has politicized women. It's encouraged, his followers, which are like, also fans, right? His followers, it's encouraged them to be involved in public participation and also in protests. But it has not fostered feminist causes. And the goals of this are certainly not feminist. In fact, in some ways, it mirrors the trad wives' support for Donald Trump, but more in a post-feminist localized context in the Pakistani context. But yes, piety populism has yielded rewards for the populist in this current moment. And here there is an important theoretical connection, which is the concept of the Homo Islamicus male leader. And this is the leader, the Muslim leader, who mixes piety and entrepreneurship, piety and politics. It's quite obvious in Muslim context. Another example is Erdogan in Turkey. In Iran, we've had several leaders of it. But all this is to say that my core argument about piety is that no ideology is neutral. And Muslim piety hinges on the very specific notion of sexual modesty of women. This is expected. And there's an uncompromising, unequal sexual and gendered order, right? We can jostle and negotiate for rights within it, but Muslim womanhood has become a site for point scoring by men on different ends of the spectrum, and even non-Muslim men, as we know. Western leaders have also used the concept of Muslim womanhood and played politics across the body of the Muslim woman. So I think there's very little negotiating space or benefits for transformative politics for women. Yes, a little concession here and there, but piety does not lend feminist ends. And it's very different. Feminism ends and transformation is very different from women's empowerment, because women's empowerment is within a system or regime or patriarchal hegemony. You jostle for a little bit of space. Feminism sees transformative politics, changing the entire gender order, the sexual order, the economic order. And that is something that it worries me or causes anxiety in terms of the potential of piety politics. And this is a difference of opinion amongst feminists. Sabah Mahmood's work and others I've argued against it. And it is quite popular, as you know, for 20 years, that theory. But this is where the piety debate lies, really, just to give a little bit of background.
you've spoken about how supporting a populist politician like Imran Khan brings them some autonomy and cracks
Mm,
the patriarchy in their homes.
yeah.
And I was wondering how the sociological idea of the second shift, the theory that working women take on a second shift of work when they get home,
Mm,
applies similarly in terms of political opinion in the houses of some of these women. How
mm.
would these dissenting voices in the home affect the larger political rhetoric, if at all, in the future?
Yeah, that's so I'll answer the first part. The labor force participation of women in Pakistan is one of the lowest in the world. There and unfortunately, no political party and no movement as such takes up this cause of women workers or is committed to increasing this. And again, this is not coincidental. Religious parties have viewed working women as liabilities to Islam, except in traditional roles like teachers or doctors, and in gender segregated settings. So consequently, Pakistan does have one of the lowest female labor force participations, and so that's a sort of almost independent challenge, right? Even the liberal parties are not taking this up. Now, regarding Imran Khan's party, yes, it has unsettled gender politics in Pakistan, but I should point out that this is not the first time. You know, when Benazir Bhutto was elected as the first female prime minister and head of state in the Muslim world, head of a country. It had huge. She was hugely popular. And there was not necessarily dissent within, but certainly there was a debate triggered within households as well. She of course galvanized men and women, but um, there were debates that took place about the role of women. Men who would vote for her expected her to behave like a man. So that this is not the first time, is what I'm saying. But the issue with Imran Khan's unsettling gender politics is it, as I said, it doesn't uphold feminist principles, and it has created space for women to exercise political agency within, as you say, domestic space, within conservative frameworks. But but more importantly for me, it's their defiance and occupation of public spaces and their adulation for a male politician that has enabled them to enter and gain legitimacy for being in public spaces. To me, that's far more beneficial, right? Yes, every movement is not going to be perfect, and we have to analyze things, in different ways. So I think that's been the biggest contribution, really, to his politics. But as I said, that here's the dilemma. You know, his party politics anchors the agenda to a very conservative one, and often, unfortunately, also anti-women and anti-minorities. So, I'm really not sure which direction this political consciousness will yield. I feel the piety factor only strengthens conservatism historically, and I think it's something that the women in who his women followers are not necessarily preoccupied with. It's really he is the cause, and he is the savior in many ways. So there's not too much tension within households. I think entire households do support him, and within that, women get agency within it. So it's still within a patriarchal mold. Um, but like I said, women, the politicians do not target women. It's not like Imran Khan's targeted women, by the way. It's not as if he's offering a pro-women agenda or he appeals to them specifically, or offers them some kind of agency either. In fact, I think I'm not sure that I've never heard him address women directly, and it's ironic because I've often heard in the years that the Taliban was attacking Pakistan and Pakistan Tehreek-e-Taliban was being formulated, there the Taliban commanders used to address women directly and try and get their support. So I think there's this interesting dichotomy that the leader really isn't too invested in women, but women are very invested right now in Pakistan in Imran Khan.
So, if someone more progressive is vocal, will
Hmm.
women push back or adapt? How would it play out, considering how women's reactions to politicians might shape the cultural zeitgeist in Pakistan, seeing as they're not part of the labor force as much, but they're part of the social fabric of the country. So, in
Hmm.
those terms.
Yeah, so a politician's statement does carry weight, right, in Pakistan. And I can't. conclusively answer the question of whether somebody with more progressive ideas, like, the Aam Aadmi Party in India, or left parties, anywhere, would attract more women per se. I wish that were true, but I don't see that potential in Pakistan. I think I've always argued there is more room on the left and on the liberal, left of center in Pakistan. But it's a combination of issues. It's not just defeatist conservatism, and so we'll always have to play to the conservative. Unfortunately, our left also plays this game of sort of giving up and saying, religion is a factor. And I think what's more important, Tanuja, is that we need regular cycles of elections, right? Because that holds representatives of whatever side of the spectrum they are on accountable. And increasingly, when you have regular cycles of elections, politics becomes a matter of negotiation rather than coercion or ideology or religion. Voters are very aware of how representatives are close to power centers, and that they are the ones who are going to deliver goods and services and access. So I think it's far more important for us to focus on regularity, and things will play out and more options will pop up if we allow that to happen. Um, and as I said, the promise of autonomy, yes. Like I said, when the Taliban leader Fazlullah canvassed for women's support in the northern areas, he was breaking the immediate domestic patriarchy, as you say, which didn't allow women out. He promised them autonomy, in theory. He spoke directly to them. He was known as Mullah FM because he used to talk on radio in the morning period when only women were at home. So I don't think that's a coincidence. He promised them divorce on, immediate divorce and dissolution of marriage, etc. They contributed, donated a lot of their jewelry to them. Later, they regretted it when he didn't deliver. But what I'm saying is that these men get a lot of following from women across classes and ages in that sense. Recently, Tanuja, the state has actually started co-opting gender piety. And it's kind of converted or redeemed or tamed what used to be considered sexually wayward or women or celebrities, and it's converted them into patriotic spokespersons for the state. We don't need this kind of co-optation and sexing up the state nationalist patriarchal vision. We want to change the state, right? And the nature of the state. So I would say the responsibility should remain on mainstream civilian parties to encourage women, to incentivize their entry into political participation. Military dictators have managed to mobilize women at local body levels and in quotas in parliament. So the civilian parties have to do better. And also to say that in 2018 elections, there were clear signs of deviant voting from women, which meant women are voting differently from men of their families. There's some trends and statistics that I looked at. So I think we should capitalize and fine tune and strategize on how to better those and look closely at those indicators.
Given your research in understanding dominant ideologies and the exclusion of women and the working classes in Pakistan, how difficult or easy has it been to reveal and study these cleavages that exist in the country? And how has the state machinery during election periods used these divides to maintain power?
So, state manipulation of elections is a whole thesis in itself. The role of intelligence agencies in this regard are well documented in the Umar Asghar Khan case. But recently, there's been a lot of technical advancements, and political consciousness and social media has made it much harder to rig elections so blatantly. It hasn't, unfortunately, stopped them from doing so. It's a kind of a crude, brutal way, but I think that's good that it's exposed more quickly and more clearly. And the 2024 election certainly exposed the state's authoritarian tendencies. It undermined progress towards democratic and gender equality. And clearly, Pakistan remains in this very small club of military-dominated countries. It's untenable to have democratic freedoms or fair and free elections in such environments. And I'll just say that, feminists have for long in Pakistan identified the four M's: men, markets, military, and Maulvis or clerics as the key obstacles to democracy and gender justice. So I would say it's important to address these structures politically and economically for meaningful change. And yes, electoral divisions Divisions, ethnic divisions and other divisions, gender divisions and sectarian issues pop up when you interfere and throw a spanner into the natural progress or cycle of electoral or representative politics. And I wish that the state and the military would understand this, but they tend to be myopic. So I'm not entirely hopeful that it'll happen immediately, but that's where the struggle lies.
Given that there are ideas on and rights for women in the Quran that are both specific to the period it was written and still implemented today, what role do these ideas play in the piety politics that exist in Pakistan? How do women regard the crossover of the rights their faith gives them with the populist politicians who will dictate the laws that govern their body?
Hmm. So, women who subscribe to the patriarchal interpretations of Islamic rights are seen as good, pious citizens, right? Those who challenge the gender norms are framed as threats to Islamic order. I mean, that's the historical struggle. The appeal of piety politics is that it does not have to deliver tangible rights or politics, right? It just offers symbolic virtue instead. And if you look at the theoretical work on piety, the politics of piety, it's about achieving self-excellence, self-virtue, exercising women exercising agency for heavenly divine rewards, right? So the rewards are in the afterlife, they're not now. And there's no standard or benchmark, right? And this is my problem. It's a kind of a post-structural, post-material aspiration. So, and I think it's interesting, just as an example, that you'll see many women who support Imran Khan will, if I ask them, what is it that appeals to you? They will cite his selective Quranic references. He's not terribly knowledgeable about religion either. He pretends to be, but really not. There's no depth. But they will quote, the common phrase, the common prayer verse that everybody knows as evidence of his pious leadership, right? And I ask them, what does it mean? Like, what are the policy implications? And it's just his persona, the piety of persona, the connection that he knows this verse, I know this verse. And for the first time, one woman said to me, for the first time, I understood what it means. And I'm like, why did you not know what it means? It's one line. Your parents have taught us this every day, and so it's a strange kind of the populist piety is very in is in Tanuja is in sharp contrast to left populism, right? Now this is important because in Pakistan under the Bhuttos we've had left populism as well, and those parties have promised very concrete things: roti, kapda, makan, jobs, material rights, social welfare, and they've also delivered it. Benazir income support program, cash transfer, right? But right populist leaders like Imran Khan rely on abstract moral rhetoric. Um, so he even gets credit for the Benazir income support program or for charity programs that have always been that have always existed in the Islamic Republic by the liberal leaning parties or by the state itself or by military dictators. There's been no specific brainchild of his that emerges from piety politics. But this is the beauty of populism. It overshadows everything else. And I've always maintained, he's a man, he's fair-skinned, he's good looking, he's got a full head of hair, he's everything that the middle-aged man, Pakistani average man is not. So I don't know, there's a lot of stuff operating over there for the kind of uh passes that he gets away with.
Kind of celebrity figure
Totally,
for the
totally.
masses.
And perhaps the only sexy celebrity figure that Pakistan has had. I mean, I really do not underplay this. I don't think it's trivial. I don't think it's a coincidence. Forget Pakistan. We saw that when he went to Malaysia and he goes to other Muslim countries, he gets, I mean, women are falling over themselves or admire him or are will acknowledge his attraction.
That's true. How do you feel the women of Pakistan will benefit if the state would allow the flourishing of regional identities to come to the forefront? With the idea that regional identities then also have certain roles for women in the society. As both women and regional races, such as Balochis or Sindhis, face oppression from the state in different forms, is there a link or intersection between the two groups that would allow, for example, women being given additional or more progressive rights under region-specific customs or practices?
So, ethnic politics well, let's put it this way, that in recent years, young Baloch and Sindhi women have led very courageous protests against state oppression. Actually, and not just state oppression, but resource allocation issues. These are the smaller provinces in terms of their rights and in terms of political power. Punjab, of course, has the largest in terms of both and most of the resources. But because these are on the peripheries in that sense, Balochistan and Sindh have seen quite a lot of resistance politics around these things: state oppression, resource allocations, enforced disappearances of dissenters. Right? There's been dissent from all the other provinces actually. But women's rights in these communities themselves are often precarious because for many different reasons, but some of them are continue to be tribal. There's a strong nationalist and conservative wave within some of these peripheries. The economic conditions are sort of dire in many of these. So all of these things trigger identity politics, right, and dissent, and being denied political participation or being denied the NFC reward, which is national, financial reward that every province gets. These are all points of contestation. So, of course, it would benefit the state if regional identities flourished. But you have to give them resource allocation. You have to give them their rightful political voice. And you have to quit disappearing dissent. And you have to pay attention to the kind of small and large uh, protests that take place on a daily basis. You can't just suppress them and then think that somehow we should flourish and somehow all Pakistanis should be equally nationalistic and patriotic according to the benchmark that is set by the Punjab. So yes, there is resentment, and I would say there's been a maturity of that resentment and sort of crude armed resistance has converted into political resistance. And this is why I feel that the state misses out on these opportunities to allow the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement or to allow women from Balochistan to formulate their political grievances into the form of politics, into a political party. That's a great channeling of the emotions and the genuine demands. And these are young people. They are politically conscious. They are aware of the world and globalization and beneficiaries of it, and have a lot to offer as role models in their provinces. But I don't know how to convince the older Muslim Punjabi Sunni male on how to share power. If I did, I'd be a better feminist, honestly.
So I think we've come to the end of our questions. Would you like to add anything to our discussion so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so the biggest disappointment I've had, I mean, I've had many, but every time there's a spark, a new change, somebody, an individual that comes up with an idea in Pakistan and leads a movement or promise is promising, it inspires hope or new movement, it inspires hope in me. But I think I would say that globally or regionally, what should be paid attention to is those kind of movements, the ones that lie under the states, that lie under the radar. And I think South Asians and Asians in general, um, we need a stronger regional movement once again. I really think that connections need to be made stronger, feminist networks, movements that are taking place, instead of us becoming insular, which is the worst thing that can happen to any state or any country, being isolated within their region. My appeal would be for more people to take interest. South Asian studies, for example, Tanuja, tends to be dominated by India, and there's many reasons for it. But there's not enough research, there's not enough academics, there's not enough connections made with Pakistani scholars, with Pakistani politicians, or with Pakistani professionals. And my appeal would be that we do many more of these podcasts. We do many more of the exchanges, cross exchanges, which used to be the way for regional politics. I think that enriched everybody, opened up our minds. We carried things back into our universities over here, exchange programs. I think that is critical for Asia. Forget the world. If we could do that, scholarships, fellowships, exchange programs for cultural programs, across the region and beyond just South Asia, in Asia in general, I think that would be hugely, hugely beneficial, particularly for the Women's Network and Women's Feminist Network. I've seen this work so well. We've had such respect and learning from feminists in South Asia. Why should we not repeat that for the next generation? I think for me that is that is my hope, and I think that's the way out, to break from this kind of hegemonistic low-level politics that and piety politics that we become reduced to as our only hope. It's clutching for straws, and I wish that there were other options for us to, and other ideologies from us for us to choose from, for younger generations to select from and learn about as well.
I agree. Thank you so much for your time and insight, Dr. Afiya. You have been listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at ices.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.